Hey guys, Thomas Goldcamp here with 24/7 Sports and Swamp247.com. Another big addition for the Florida Gators out of the transfer portal in men's basketball. Florida and coach Mike White have landed Charleston Southern guard Phlandrous Fleming Jr. He's a guy that averaged 20.1 points per game last season for the Buccaneers. Another high-quality addition of the Florida roster from a mid-major program. A guy looking to make a move up and play at a higher level, certainly has shown the ability to do that. Not only is Fleming Jr. a 20.1 point per game scorer, he was named his conference's Defensive Player of the Year, and he really fills the stat sheet out. He's a guy that averaged 7.4 rebounds per game, is really active on the defensive end of the floor, creating steals, is able to dish out some assists. So this is the fourth transfer that Florida's landed. He's the third guy that scored at least 15 points per game last season. So the Florida Gators are really putting together a roster of guys that have proven themselves at various levels. Obviously, Fleming, a guy coming from a mid-major, he'll have to step up to a higher level of talent. But the Gators have really done a nice job replacing some of their departures this offseason. You know, they decided to go after Fleming after a guy like Noah Gurley, a forward from Furman that Florida was kind of looking at, ended up picking Alabama. So Florida pivots and picks up a very good player in Phlandrous Fleming out of Charleston Southern. Again, he's the second Defensive Player of the Year that Florida has taken out of the transfer portal. Brandon McKissick, a guy for UMKC, again, a smaller level, but he was also named his conference's Defensive Player of the Year. And so you're kind of starting to see what Mike White is trying to build through the transfer portal. He wants guys that not only can fill it up in terms of scoring, in terms of rebounding, but he really wants guys that are going to be able to get out and run and then can also get back defensively and really defend. And I think, Phlandrous Fleming, maybe not the most prolific three-point shooter. That's an area of his game that I think he still has to work on. But when you talk about adding a guy that really has a well-rounded game, I think he's a really good replacement for a guy like Scotty Lewis. So let's talk about Florida's replacements for the guys that have left the roster. And I think when you stack them up, there are some questions about, these mid-major guys stepping up to the SEC level, but there's also a couple of guys that have Power 5 experience, high major experience already. You look at it, Treyman departs, a guy that scored 16 points per game, 5.6 rebounds per game. Florida adds Penn State transfer Myron Jones. He averaged 15.3 points per game and 2.7 rebounds per game. I think pretty fair trade-off there for Florida, maybe not quite as much in the terms of ball handling, being able to distribute as a facilitator. I mentioned it in a previous video. I still think that's an area that Florida has to add somebody via the transfer portal. A lot of the additions so far for Florida in the backcourt have been mostly guys that have played off the ball rather than being a primary ball handler. But still, when you talk about Myron Jones being the leading scorer for Penn State in arguably the best conference in college basketball last year, he's obviously a very quality addition. You look at Noah Locke departing, a guy that was obviously a sharpshooter from three-point range, averaged 10.6 points per game. Well, you go and get Brandon McKissick from UMKC. He scored 17.2 points per game and actually shot a higher clip from three-point land than Noah Locke did last year, shooting 42.9% from three-point line. So I think you've got a guy, again, pretty good replacement for a guy like Noah Locke. A little bit of a step up in competition. We'll see how McKissick does with that. But again, when you talk about like-for-like transfers, Mike White's really done a nice job so far. Scotty Lewis departs, a guy that was a really good defender, 7.9 points per game, and obviously, quality on the defensive end of the floor. You add Fleming, all of a sudden you've got a guy that not only provides you a defensive presence as his conference's Defensive Player of the Year, he also scored 20.1 points per game. I don't see how you look at that as anything but an upgrade, particularly given the lack of development we saw from Scotty Lewis over really the last couple of years. Finally, the fourth transfer addition that Florida has as of this point, Omar Payne departs, 3.8 points per game, 3.2 rebounds per game, and you add CJ Felder from Boston College. Again, a guy that has high major experience, a lot of quality playing time, averaged 9.7 points per game and 5.9 rebounds per game. Clear step up in production from Omar Payne. Now, Florida does have two guys that they haven't technically replaced yet in Quez Glover and Osai Osifo. Neither of those two guys, in my mind, were really significant contributors, just to be honest with you. And so, if Florida lands a player that can come in out of the transfer portal and produce, I think you've looked at this roster and you've upgraded it. Now, there are still questions. How does Mike White kind of get these guys to gel? You're talking about three transfers coming in that are used to averaging at least 15 points per game last season. How does that mesh when, two of those three guys, or really all three of those guys, are in the backcourt? Where do the minutes come from? Is Florida able to, maybe because of the depth of scoring that they have, suddenly start to play a little bit deeper, get a little bit deeper on the bench, and really start to run teams? I think that's the goal for Mike White. I think the way you see the roster being built with the addition of Fleming now to these other three guys, you're really seeing a team that, Florida's going to want to run with. They're going to want to get out. The other thing you have to consider, though, a lot of guys that are used to scoring, a lot of big egos potentially, guys trying to fit in as they step to a new level. How will that all play out? We'll see. But Florida now has a significant addition to its roster via the transfer portal, a guy that scored 20.1 points per game for Charleston Southern and was his conference's Defensive Player of the Year. I think it's safe to say at this point that Coach Mike White has done a very, very good job in the transfer portal, and now it's just about how he can put these pieces together. That'll do it for this episode of the Rapid Reaction, guys. If you liked this video, be sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel. We've got more Florida Gators content coming your way. Thanks.